Hey YouTube, it's early in the morning. I've got my green tea, what every good monk should drink, and we're going to continue breaking down this GS550 engine. Hope to get the ignition points and advance off and clutch and starter motor, and we'll see how far we get. So welcome to Urban Monk TV. Guess I'll start this morning by just pulling this starter out of here. You can see I've got two 10mm bolts. Loose first. That's a tight fit for that socket. I'm not square on it, but just be careful. Once I've got them loose, there's Phillips head on those, so taking the rest of the way out with that. That had some thread lock on it. Slide that motor back. There's a rubber O-ring there. I'm going to check my gasket set and see if I have that O-ring. It doesn't look like anything special, although it is bathed in oil, so I might want to make sure I've got a oil-resistant O-ring in that position. We'll check Suzuki for that part, and also check my engine gasket kit for that. So I've still got my negative lead here, which comes straight off my battery, and previous owner had put this battery cutoff switch on here, which frankly isn't a bad idea. So I may continue to use that, although I'll mount it better than they did. And that just goes straight to the engine block. We'll get that off of here. That is tight. I'm going to need the impact driver. Go ahead and fix the camera angle there for you. Sorry. So again, this negative, I'll call it the hot wire off the battery, goes straight to the crankcase, and it's quite tight. It's a GIS screw, so I've got the larger impact driver bit in here. Loose. You know, some people that have been watching these videos commented to me privately, so you know, feel free to use the comments here. I mean, this is about having a discussion around this. Every question that's asked raises the knowledge for everyone out there, but the question that was posed to me is, why so much detail? There's a lot of videos out there that either use a fast forward function or just save you a lot of time in watching these, but I guess my point, my intention here is to do these in a manner like you're hanging out in the garage with me. I've been working on my own, I mean, as a child, bicycles and motorcycles from the age of 12, and my own cars as I got older, and worked in automotive in my early 20s. At the same time I was a up and coming musician, and picked up a lot of knowledge along the way, and I just want to share it. Share what you know, they say. And I think the way to learn this stuff is to really take the time to get into the detail. And that's why I'm doing it this way. And I know it's a longer journey, but I think it's going to be well worth it for people that have the patience to watch all of these videos. And of course, if I forget what I did, I've got this all documented on YouTube for me to watch when I'm putting it back together. So little added bonus there. So the ignition timing has 3 mount bolts. We're going to have to set this timing again later. I should say screws. The other thing I'll say about all the detail of these videos is those of you who don't need all the detail because you already understand how to work on motorcycles. You know, I don't know if this video series is entirely for you. I'm sure there's something for everybody here, but I get, as I go out and I talk to people throughout my day, I find most of the people I run into don't have as much experience working on motorcycles and cars and things as I do. That doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of people out there that are far more skilled than I am. There are, but I'm a detail guy, and if you don't have the patience for this level of detail, I don't know if you should be working on a motorcycle to this depth. Let's put it that way. Enough of that. I've removed the bolt and the little, I don't know, nut cap, I'll call it, that sits on here. And then this has a grommet. And the wires, they're hooked up underneath. The other thing is, you know, the whole point of working on a motorcycle in the garage is relaxation. It's a form of meditation. It's centering for the spirit, good for the soul, you know. And it's the time taken for yourself. Take time, have patience. That's why we do it. That's what the point of this is. And yes, you get to have a fun motorcycle to ride when you're done and show off to your friends, but frankly, your friends don't care that much, and neither does anybody else. So this is really about you. Take time for yourself. Okay, so as I loosen these bolts on the clutch pressure plate, this is going to want to spin on me, and I want to hold that in place. So I've got one of these cheap rubber band tools that I can hold that with. Doesn't take much pressure, but I'm just trying to make sure I'm not transferring all of this torque from this wrench into components that are running onto each other, because I can't think of well, that's actually the right direction to travel for everything, so I guess we're okay there. Oops, sliding off. Not the best tool, but certainly an inexpensive one compared to specialized tools that are called for by the manufacturer. That's slipping on me. There we go. There, I think I've got them all. Yeah. Cheap, silly thing. Usually come in a set of 2. big one and a small one. I don't know what I paid, $10. Doesn't take up too much room in the toolbox. Okay, it's huge, but another thing I want to talk about in regards to the centering of one's spirit and calming the mind. Commuting the other day, and here in California we can split lanes, which saves a lot of time. I think elsewhere in the world it's called filtering. Maybe there's other words for it, but I saw a guy on a motorcycle in front of me get blocked by a car that was in his way, was in my way too, and he got extremely angry and was revving his engine, making as much noise as he possibly could to try to get the attention of the driver. The driver was not paying attention, and wasn't a threat to him if he just stayed back and waited for that driver or an opportunity to get around him. And by the time that opportunity did present itself, the motorcyclist was so angry that he was just waving his arms at the guy, well, one arm, and I got two here. You notice I left this with two. There's still some pressure there, and I just want to keep two opposed. I'm kind of holding my hand against it as I loosen these up. And gave him the finger as he passed by. And I thought, if you're that angry, what's the joy of motorcycling? Yes, the driver maybe should be more attentive to other people, but let's face it, folks, there's millions of people in this city. There's billions on the planet, and we all have a different agenda at times. And you're not going to escape that. Somebody is going to get in your way. Somebody is going to not be paying attention. And it's not personal. They're not doing it to piss you off. I didn't get that. If you're riding around on two wheels with that much anger, then it isn't working for you. It's supposed to be relaxing. It's supposed to be zen. It's supposed to bring joy. My 2 cents on that. Anyways, I'm going to take this pressure plate off, and I'm running out of room. I got to get organized here. Watch out for this little roller bearing in here, that you don't lose any pieces there. Here, I can show you that. It's a little bearing that rides in there against that washer. Okay, so we've got our clutch springs out. There are 6 of them, and we've got some inspection to do here, because perhaps these springs are worn to the point where they are not applying enough pressure onto the clutch discs, and it is that pressure from those springs that holds that together and creates enough friction for the torque coming from your engine to stay locked in all the way through your drivetrain back to the rear wheel. And that is both under acceleration, so think full throttle and how much torque there would be there, or deceleration. You're doing 70 miles an hour and suddenly you're off the throttle. There's a lot of forces that get driven into those clutch plates, and if the springs are worn, there's going to be slippage. So they're a pretty cheap part to replace if they're out of spec. spec is standard when new, they are 38.4 millimeters. 38.4. There's seen springs before. This one is 37.2. Actually, let me snug that up a little bit. I don't want to be compressing it. I've got 36.8. The limit is 35.9, so I'm still okay. You know, this is one of those places where you have to ask yourself, well, here I'm 36.9. 37.1. 36.8. 37, maybe 36.9 actually. 36.8. I'm within spec. I don't remember this bike having any clutch slippage. Next thing we have to measure is the discs themselves. So that's another place where wear will slowly create more clearances between those discs, and eventually things will start to slip. So let's measure those next. So the next thing is to take this clutch basket out, and I want to show you on here. Hopefully I got to hold this really steady. That washer is bent over and crushed against the flat of this nut, and boy, this is hard to do. It's kind of a balancing act. So I need to get a screwdriver and a hammer and a punch and flatten that back out before I can remove that nut. So first I'll see if I can pry under there. Yeah. Just to get a start on it. Then hopefully I can get my punch on it. If you're careful with this, you can, reuse this washer. Hopefully you can end up with the flat that you bend over at a different position. This is curious to me. This washer has only been used once, obviously, which, a person may think, well, is that original? There's 28,000 miles on this bike, although, I'll take that back. I don't know that there is 28,000 miles on this bike. The engine doesn't match the frame number, so this engine could have a lot fewer miles on it, although from the looks of the cylinder walls, there's miles on it, and the worn out intake cam. So maybe this clutch was replaced at one point and they put a new washer on there, but it doesn't really matter at this point. It's getting replaced. Alright, let's see what size socket I'm going to need for this nut. 32 millimeter. Okay, this nut I already loosened up, but I'm sorry, I did it off camera. There's a specialized tool that fits across two of these bolts and has a big hole in the center for your socket to go through it, and it has a handle, and that keeps this from spinning
while you're loosening that nut. And so I took some time to think about this and how I could carefully do it. The torque on this nut is not too bad, thus that's why you have to flatten that washer against one of the flats to hold it, because it isn't a real tight torque spec. But I took a long flat screwdriver and ran it across a couple of these things, and I could still fit my 32mm socket on there with the breaker bar, and I busted it loose that way. I was very careful about how much torque I put into that, but that's how I did it. And just be gentle on these things. You snap it off, you're going to be out there looking for this basket. And so with that loose, I can go ahead and take off that nut and the washer. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, the light is terrible. But I'll go ahead and reuse this. I'll just find a different spot to flatten it against. And out comes my basket. I've got a little plate on the back side here. I want to be careful to keep the order of these things correct. And now for storing all of this, I'm just going to put these together. There. That's a nice kit I can just put in a Ziploc bag. Okay, so I was thinking that this clutch basket had to remain in there because as I pulled it out, it hits against the crankcase. But then I realized that there are two threaded holes in this spacer, which is in between a roller bearing, and those two holes are threaded for a reason. I took the two starter bolts that mount the starter, and sure enough, they thread right in there. So thank you, Suzuki, for providing the needed tools. I don't think I'll even need two of them. One is enough. This thing is flowing nicely enough. And I can pull this whole assembly out carefully. Oh, there it is. And there I've got that big chunk of metal. Clean surface. And now I have plenty of clearance. Oh, do I? It's gotta be. Yeah. Boy, dang. Okay, so this bearing has got to come out. There we go. So watch out for that roller bearing inside. And this is our main driven gears here. So the crankshaft, here I'll get the camera and move it. So our crankshaft pulley is right up there, and then this gear on the outside of the clutch basket rides against that, and this whole basket drives torque into that shaft, into what do they call that? That's your main shaft? Yeah, I'll get the terminology all screwed up, but anyways, torque goes into the transmission from there, and then you've got another shaft right behind that cover that comes out over here, and that's your rear sprocket, or your front sprocket, that transfers it to the drivetrain, and the torque goes back to the rear wheel. And your transmission is essentially mounted over those two shafts right inside there. And with that, this video is going to be a wrap. Thanks for joining me again another week here. We'll continue on. I need to get this engine cleaned up, and I need to go buy some things to prepare for that project.
There's a lot of grease and oil and grime on here, and sand and dead bugs. You know, I need to degrease this. I need to find a safe way to do that and not kill my lawn, destroy my concrete outside on the driveway, things like that. So I got to go get a tarp, and I've got some other ideas about how to control the degreaser that I'm using. But thanks for joining me. Please be sure to subscribe and click like if you liked this video and if you want to follow along on future videos. And we'll keep moving on this 1978 Suzuki GS550 Cafe Racer. Thanks.